Shocking! Do you know that people from the Viking era actually had horns in their foreheads? Also, there are rumors that they were brutal cannibals. Fascinating, right? Probably not. There are many myths about the Vikings that pop culture wants you to believe. But here, we are to bust all the myths and expose all the lies. Today's video is going to be damn exciting, so stay tuned till the end. The Viking Age was a time when life was extremely difficult. The Viking warriors' biggest foe was the challenging continent of Northern Europe. Due to the meager harvests, the Vikings were unable to save enough food for the winter to support both themselves and their animals. Therefore, the majority of them were killed right before the onset of winter each fall. Given their relatively brief lives, being a Viking cow should certainly be near the top of the list of historical things you probably wouldn't have wanted to be. Males and women shared the labor force, but men performed the majority of the agricultural or field work. To plow the fields, kill the animals, and prepare the meat for winter preservation, men were required. Although it is fiction that Vikings wore horns, the fabled Viking burial really happened. Famous warriors would have their remains transported aboard a vessel that may be as large as a battleship or as little as a rowboat. The ship would be packed with funeral commodities, which were necessary stuff that the deceased would require in the afterlife. Jewels, pets, weapons, and most dreadfully, living slaves that belonged to the deceased can be among these possessions. The boat would be filled before being set ablaze to literally send the warrior forth in light of glory. Whereas males made up the majority of individuals who earned this accolade, a few women have also been given it. A writer by the name of Ahmad ibn Fadlan saw a burial that resembled one of these ship burials in the 10th century. According to his writing, affluent individuals with rank often inherited 1/3 of their money from their kin. Another third would cover the cost of their burial robes. The final third was used to purchase alcoholic drinks to be offered at the cremation, which was followed by a party akin to a Viking burial. It's probably not a surprise to you, but the winters in Scandinavia can be rather chilly. The earth freezes over as a result, making movement challenging. However, if hunting is a need in your daily existence, as it was for the Vikings frequently, you cannot let a little ice hold you down. What were the Vikings' responses to it? Archaeologists think they probably just slipped on the ice. More than 100 preserved pine keys discovered in bogs lend credence to this. Fascinating, right? The Vikings had to replace their wooden plows every 2 days, which added to the difficulty of the situation. After the Viking Age, metal plows were first used. Slaves played a significant role in Viking society. Many were captured during raids and exchanged or sold as far away as North Africa. Serfs, also referred to as slaves, had no rights and were able to be slaughtered without penalties. In fact, during exceptionally hard years when there wasn't enough food for everyone, slaves were killed alongside the livestock. But at least slaves didn't have to worry about being devoured because Vikings weren't cannibals. The Vikings lived in Scandinavia and moved over Northern Europe and Russia, where agriculture was difficult and food production was low. This meant that, contrary to popular belief, a Viking warrior's life was mostly devoted to farming as opposed to beheading people, because everyone would be hungry if the crops weren't sown and harvested. It turns out that throughout much of the ancient world, robbery and pillage were more of a luxury. Few villages could afford to have their men abandon the crops for weeks or months at a time. The majority of Viking villages had between 15 and 50 households, making them small yet closely knit groups. The typical Viking home was one large room. Additionally, a Viking family would presumably cohabitate with their pets. Some two-room homes were constructed to protect occupants from being crushed by goats as they slept, although they often belonged to the most affluent elements of society. Wealthier Vikings acquired larger homes with greater space as time went on, and Viking civilization developed. The people, animals, and food that required protection could all be housed in these homes with ease. The nave was the name given to the biggest room in such buildings. It was often used as a hall and contained a fireplace and cooking pan. The carls or farmers and craftspeople made up the bulk of Viking civilization and were placed above the slaves. These people made up Viking society's lower class and were ruled by jarls, who made up the upper class. Compared to most civilizations of the period, women had more independence, and in 2017, the discovery of a Viking tomb of what was thought to be a high-ranking female warrior seemed to imply that women might even hold senior positions in the military. However, skepticism about the legitimacy of the claim that the tomb genuinely belonged to a woman developed almost quickly, and it now appears improbable that the skeleton found within it and tested for DNA was indeed that of a woman. The majority of Viking women were not renowned fighters or chieftains. The average Viking lady ran her household, which included stocking the pantry, weaving, mending sails, and generally acting as the head of the family, while the typical Viking male worked all day on the land. The lives of Viking women were not easy. Adultery by women was viewed as a very terrible offense. Additionally, in some locales, a Viking who discovers his wife cheating may be permitted to send both his wife and her mistress away. Some early Christian observers believed that the Vikings were polygamous since males were permitted to maintain concubines or even have children outside of marriage. Women did, however, have certain rights. Viking ladies had the option to divorce their husbands if they desired, and the legal procedure was surprisingly straightforward. According to the evidence, this process was as simple as gathering several witnesses and announcing oneself divorced. Its presence is extremely extraordinary, even though ownership may be a little more challenging. Viking males and females engaged in hnefatafl, a game in their spare time. It is thought that hnefatafl, a theatrical strategic game like chess, sprang from an older Roman game. They also liked playing standard chess. The Lewis Chessman, well-known Norwegian chess set from the 12th century, is housed in the British Museum and features pieces made of whale tooth and walrus ivory. The Vikings created the longship, an iconic ship with a big sail and a constructed headpost at the front of the ship for both exploration and combat. When there was little or no wind, oars assisted the ship in navigating, and when combined with a sail, they increased the ship's speed. They also had the bitas, a Viking invention that was a sail-mounted spar that allowed the ships to sail upwind. High-ranking Vikings were frequently interred beside their ships, as well as with dogs, livestock, and slaves. Raids and battles were a feature of Vikings' life, albeit they were considerably less often than pop culture tells you. Given the ferocity of the post-Roman Empire in Europe, Viking tradition mandated that all free men own weapons and be permitted to carry them at all times. However, the specific weapons a Viking had and wore were a sign of their social standing. Poor Vikings had to make do with shields, spears, and axes, whereas wealthy Vikings sometimes owned a full set of armor, including a helmet, shield, mail, and a sword. Due to the dearth of experienced artisans in Viking civilization, swords were really rarely used in warfare. The majority of Viking swords were ornaments. Only Snorri's writings allowed us to retain a large portion of what we currently know about Norse mythology. There is evidence that all Vikings, essentially irrespective of their social rank, consumed a high-protein diet. In reality, the ordinary English farmer in the Middle Ages fared better than even the poorest Viking. A typical Viking household would eat twice daily, after waking up and after work. Thanks to the extraordinary hunting prowess of the Vikings, meat was a frequent component of their diet, including goat, reindeer, elk, lamb, cattle, mutton, horse, and even the rare bear. Both farms and estates raised pigs, and the pork was particularly well-liked. The majority of Vikings' favorite meat meals were prepared. A scouse was a stew that was traditionally served with bread made from beans, grains, and tree bark. Catfish, being a significant staple diet, should not be a surprise to mariners. There were several options for preparing herring, including pickling, drying, salting, and smoking. However, meat wasn't the only component of the Viking diet. It really had both fruit and vegetables and was fairly well-rounded. They ate apples, cabbage, beans, and carrots according to the evidence. It appears that many of the mythology surrounding Viking warriors are only myths. The majority of Vikings experienced varying degrees of hunger rather than becoming hulking men toughened by the northern cold. The majority of Vikings did not live lives in pillaging and looting. Rather, they were traders, artists, sailors, and farmers whose livelihoods were frequently disrupted by violent confrontations that lasted just a few minutes. At least one Viking tale about the berserker was actually true. So maybe we didn't tarnish Vikings entirely. What do you think became of the medieval Viking berserkers? Comment below and let us know. Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel and don't forget to press the bell icon. We'll catch up with you in the next video.